What's up, YouTube? It's your boy, DJ Peter Lowe, and I am a host on the Kpop Podcast, the Kpop Cast. We prepared this presentation. I did this like the night before it was due, the night before we presented, on what goes behind the scenes of a Kpop podcast. And I thought, hey, if there are other YouTubers, other people out there on the internet looking to create their own Kpop podcast, this presentation might be helpful for you. So let's see if I can remember everything I crammed that late night when I was pulling together the slide presentation. So it's the BTS of the Kpop cast, or in other words, the behind the scenes of the Kpop cast, or beyond the scene, or BTS for short. So here's what you'll learn from this presentation. We'll take you through the audio production process behind the Kpop cast, why we've structured the show in the format that we have, and number 3, some audio production pro tips for those of you who are looking to create a better polish and sound for your podcast. And lastly, I'd like to share with you some lessons that we ourselves are still figuring out, things that we're still trying, experimenting, and learning. So hopefully you don't have to repeat the same mistakes we have. Oh, and lastly, you'll learn why Soyeon is the greatest idol there ever was and ever will be. But first, before we dive into that, what is the Kpop cast? We started in 2016 with the mission, the intent to excite critical thinking from crazy, overzealous K-pop stans. I think oftentimes there's a lack of multidimensionality behind being a stereotypical K-pop fan. If you love your oppa, that means you're supposed to worship every single thing about that person. That's not a healthy way to consume or digest K-pop. What we're here to say and illustrate on our podcast is, well, you can still like oppa, but have constructive things to say. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, doing that demonstrates signs of intellectual maturity, growth, development. Let's make K-pop a healthy thing again, or at least that's what we started with. Here's some of the episode formats that we've experimented with as a K-pop podcast. We still stand by our Daebak or not format. That's where we look at and review a song in K-pop and we dissect different elements of it. And lastly, we give it our Daebak or not judgment of the song itself. We have a hit replay, quote unquote hit replay. Yes, SHINee fans, you should get the reference. A hit replay show where we talk about hit replays of the week, songs that we are liking. It's a personal recommendation, personal picks episode. We also include hit replays as an abbreviated intro of our Daebak or Not episodes. In addition to that, something that we've tried is a hot issue. Yes, 4-minute fans, hopefully you got that reference as well. In order to do less production heavy stuff, we thought maybe we could just do a raw hot take on something that's trending at that very moment and just publish an issue. So what's our hot take on that hot issue, that scandal, whatever it may be? From time to time, we will also have trends, conversations on what appears to be a trend or a theme in K-pop. We will also have panel conversations with guests in and around the K-pop community, perhaps on that topic or a listicle of some kind. You get the idea. And lastly, we've also done some really bad eye-rolling skits and dramas. You can listen to our Baby Shark episode, our Hallyu Halloween. Oh my God, did I say that wrong? Hallyu Halloween Spooktacular episode, where we pretend to be characters and we sort of act out an audio drama scene that you can listen along to and think it's really bad acting. So here's some examples of that, of some episodes that we've done. We also talk about Soyeon from time to time. Soyeon is a fantastic idol. And if there's one thing that you're going to leave our podcast knowing, it's that Jun Soyeon is the best thing to happen. Here's the rap line behind who's on the team on the Kpop cast. We've got Michaela, PV Nim. She's often behind the scenes of the show. She, of course, drops in time to time to be a voice on the podcast, but more often than not does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So she's doing a lot of our administrative work. She's coordinating, she's planning when we're going to record what and when. She also does the big job of distributing our episodes. So after we published it, helping socialize it, make sure that we're tweeting, putting it on our socials, talking about it. She's also asking our followers, hey, what do you guys think of this topic, to make sure that we're soliciting their input and opinion. So Michaela PDNM is our all-around jack of all trades member of the staff. Next up, we've got Stephanie, our queen bee. She's the co-host. She often is someone that we refer to and just talking about the strategy of what we want to do. She is, I mean, honestly, the best personality between all the hosts, and she is an OG K-pop veteran. She's been around for a long time. She's got a lot of history, a lot of connections in the field that we love to touch on and use when we're providing new context or new spin on current hits. And lastly, we've got myself, Pilo, K-pop DJ, producer, editor, Soyeon evangelist, and I pay the bills for hosting our podcast. So some things that we've used as our anchor and how we make any decision behind what we do for the podcast are based on the following values and philosophies. So first, it's essential that we be deliberate and focused. When we look at constructing the outline of any given podcast episode, we ask ourselves, what do we want the listeners to take away from this conversation? And then just focus on that, narrow in on that one thing, and then just kill everything else from programming, if possible. Don't waste people's time. We also think about what's the best story to tell in an audio format. What can audio do well? What can it not do? I think I gave some later examples later on in this presentation. It's also important that we be authentic. We be ourselves, that we speak deliberately. Something perhaps somewhat half unique about our podcast is that this is a hobby for us. So that means that we're unencumbered in our opinion and in our commentary. We're not chasing necessarily what's lucrative or profitable in this. We're doing this because we've got something to say on the matter that needs to be said. We're trying to ignite a conversation in K-pop, and hopefully that carries through that genuine, our genuine reactions and thoughts on what we're discussing. Something that we'd advise for other podcasts, especially y'all K-pop podcasts who are looking to, those of you who are looking to create your own K-pop podcast, focus on what makes you unique. And it looks like I'm getting a phone call. Okay, here we go. I'm back. Focus on your strengths. Think about what makes you unique. What is it something that only you know? Or something that you are particularly qualified to say or share? Make that your strength. Make that your unique selling point for how you want to brand and do your show. And always apply that lens to the discussion. Next, we try to not to, I don't know, maybe we've been critiqued for doing this, for being overly highbrow and sophisticated, but we don't assume our audience knows everything. We try to make sure that anything we say on an episode is self-contained, that you don't need to have done a ton of research before you're listening to an episode, because then that's just context you're not going to be able to follow along. You're narrowing your audience. And for people who are already familiar with the material, I think they can stand the couple extra seconds of you just walking it through for the rest of the audience. So we try to explain it like they're five, or just try to speak in ways that is approachable, accessible. And what is this last bullet here? Oh, yes, it's Soyeon. So through a fair and balanced process, we always explain why Jin Soyeon is just objectively the best. And just to really drive home this point of focusing in on what your audience should listen to and what matters, I want to read this quote from Roman Mars of 99% Invisible. Roman says, if you have 100,000 listeners and you edit out one useless minute, you are saving 100,000 wasted minutes in the world. You're practically a hero. So just kill that dead air and don't insult your listeners' time. All right. How do we produce a podcast? Here's some general lessons, or if nothing else, an inspiration for a model and template for how one might want to structure a podcast. Here's our workflow, beginning to end. About 2 weeks prior, maybe even further out than that, we come up with the idea. Hey, what's a cool story? What's a cool hook? Oh, what's a trend that we're seeing right now? What's an untold story in K-pop? What's a story in K-pop that others can't tell that maybe we could tell? That's the idea phase. Next, we go into recording. So about a week out, we'll kind of figure out who are the key guests. We invite them on and we record the episode. After that, it gets stuck in all like editing eternity. No, really, this is my time dependent. So I spend between 2,000 to 9,000 days editing an episode. And then lastly, after we've done all that polish, all that editing, then we just put it out there, we publish it, and we distribute it to our listeners and followers. To illustrate where that time goes. The ideation prep, that's maybe like 10 hours. The recording itself for any given episode is about an hour. Most of the time it's under an hour. But sometimes we'll give ourselves a bit more flex time than that, just so people can file in, file out, answer any questions, etc. And then you'll see this big 75%, the big Pac-Man of this pie chart, is in post-production. That's a lot of freaking time. We're actually looking at deviating away from that. Like, it's something that perhaps at one earlier stages of our show, we were known for providing a great deal of polish, but I think what we're realizing is just more important to put out more content more frequently on a consistent, regular basis. So anyway, to date, a lot of it has been in post-production. And then lastly, it's in the marketing, promotion. Here's the episode out in the world. Check it out, y'all. All right, so in the ideation stage, just to sort of like go through it a little bit deeper. After we've come up with our idea, we'll add it to the calendar and we'll think about when's a good time to put that episode out into the world. Are there going to be hot moments or seasons where that conversation will be better primed to be aired? We think about who are the best people to talk about that issue or topic. It's something that we've loved in building connections and expanding our communities, just finding the articulate spokespeople and experts on these different topics. We will, ahead of that recording date, we'll also ask our listeners a chance for them to give us their thoughts, perhaps edit or guide the direction of the episode as well. And additionally, incorporate some of their really great comments into the show recording itself. After we've provided all that background, what we'll do is we'll create a outline, like a sort of scaffold or structure for what that episode will look like, or sound like, I should say. And the process of building an outline, especially for our debug or not show format, will assign to the hosts or the guests their role for the episode. So, Peter, I really need you to look at the audio of this song in K-pop. Michaela, could you take a closer look at the visuals? What they were trying to convey in the visual concept or the choreography of the song. Stephanie, does this have a Korean meaning or cultural context that can say or do more that our listeners should take away? These are ways, not always, but ways that we might assign expert area roles for a episode recording. Here's what an outline looks like. So this was for, it looks like our Blackpink episode. Oh, and you can actually see in the top left here, we assigned some roles. So visuals, lyrics, message, choreo, music, etc. Michaela will kind of help prep us. She'll do some preliminary research, find some relevant articles on the work so we can make sure that we can reference what else has been said or written about a given song for that week. And then we go into the different segments. And I think in the past, people have accused us of sounding very overly scripted. And what we've done to get away from that, I mean, it's not like we said things line by line. The closest thing that we said line by line is right in the intro, which says like, "Welcome to the Kpop Podcast. I am this person, this person, this person." But first, I hit replays. That's almost verbatim each week, and that's the closest thing to a line by line scripting. Otherwise, it's just the bulleted ideas. We'll talk about this segment. We'll talk about this segment. We'll talk about this segment. But a way to make those conversations a bit more organic, we've tried to actually be a little bit more opaque with each other. So we don't provide the full detail of our thoughts in the bulleted form. Maybe just something to kind of remind us what the point it was that we were trying to make. All right. So after we've done all that prep work in the ideation phase, then we go into the recording. We'll send them a recording guide. So it's a basic thing like a Google Doc that says, "Hey, thank you for joining us for this conversation. Here are ways you should record your voice." We ask our guests to record locally so we can get a higher version of their voice, and then we'll just blend them in post. And then I can do more post-production work on each of their voices, sometimes compensating for reverb in the room and EQ and other stuff. We'll also invite our guests to the episode to a private Slack channel on our Slack space where we can ideate, talk through the episode, pre-recording date, and also if we need to pass any like quick notes to each other during the recording, we can do that there. We also share the outline of that episode with our guests. We'll maybe do a very quick sound check as we all arrive for the recording just to make sure all the buttons and sounds are working. And what we've started to do a little bit touch and go lately is live streaming our raw recordings. So we'll just live stream straight to YouTube the recording itself. And it's unpolished, but it's just been a way to get content out there. There are a few other ways we're thinking of using video content to edit with a podcast. So using the video footage of someone speaking and then pairing that with the audio track of their voice, and then doing some sort of potentially future video production of the podcast where you can actually see talking heads. Lastly, after we're done doing our recording, we have everyone upload their recordings to a Google Drive, and I'll just download them and then start the post-production editing process. Here's what our guest guide for recording looks like. It's actually inspired by my day job. My trade is in public relations, and having seen a number of these from NPR and American Public Media, I sort of borrowed their format. So here are some tips that we provide to each of our guests. And then the post-production phase happens, and you can see kind of what happens. We do some editing, and then we do some more editing, I'll take my toddler and I'll pull him off the keyboard and I'll do more editing. Then I'll respond to something crazy happening at work, and then I'll do more editing, and I'll be drinking alcohol through the process to help me get through it. Lastly, after we've done all that editing, we will publish the episode, and we'll try to come up with like an image. You'll see that on many podcast platforms. They allow you to pair an image with the episode itself. We'll write a description for the episode, provide relevant links to things that we reference or discuss or things for further reading. We'll upload it to SoundCloud. We'll promote it on our socials, share it with our followers and friends, etc. And if we think we've got something particularly positive to say about a group or idol, we'll actually approach those different fandoms of that group or idol and share that episode with them. All right. So something that we've learned through gradual trial and error and have gotten closer to perfection on over time is our Daebak or Not show format. Here are the elements of our Daebak or Not show format. We start with the intro, get to the point super quick. In the intro, you only have a limited amount of time to captivate people's attention before they just drop off, tune out, check out something different. So we try to get that to that point as soon as freaking possible. And we try to make it with a bang. Oh, and here's my toddler.
Go to Daddy.
Hey, Carson. You want to talk, Carson? So after we've provided an introduction, where was I? We try to use some sort of like background music to make it a loud like boom or a bang, like pay attention to us. And that's usually like the first beat of the intro, or if it's more of a melodic intro, we'll use it to layer in our voice. I'll get more on that later. After we've gone through our intro, then we'll go into our hit replays. And that's usually the space where we can bring a lot of our production polish to an episode. It allows us to cover more hits for a given moment in time outside of the Daebak or Not song that we are reviewing. It's also a way to like still maintain people's attention, because it's kind of like shiny object here, shiny object here, shiny object here. It's very audibly dynamic as well. Then we go into the core part of the episode, the review, where we dissect different parts and ingredients of it. And lastly, after we've completed a review and we've provided our assessment, then we sign off, we provide some listener highlights, and we do some like post bumper banter. This is what an episode looks like after we've done some editing. So here's the roadmap. So at the beginning, you'll see like it's very brief, I don't know, like 10 seconds, 10 to 30 seconds for the intro. That's a lot of time, by the way. Next, we go into hit replays, and that's about between 3 and 5 minutes. About. Then you see there's a really big arc. This is the review part. And the review part is broken up to several different segments. Here, let me take you through. And just to close out on this roadmap, after we've gone through the review, we'll do the closeout. And then at the very end, we'll include some Easter eggs or bloopers if there's a good fit, if there's a good set of them. So starting with the intro in the hit replay section. Again, you go out, you want to capture that attention as soon as possible. Don't leave any dead air in the beginning. If you look at listener retainment figures and projections, it's usually, well, by its very definition, it's going to be the highest at the front, and then usually there's a radical drop right after that. That's all the people who are kind of checking it out and then just piecing out. You want to make sure you're doing the best that you can to capture the people who would probably peace out, but are giving them something cool, sexy to captivate their attention. And in that introduction, we try to set the expectations for, here's what you're going to get on this show. Here's what you're going to learn. And I think for the past few episodes, we've experimented with public service announcements, or PSAs. And we try not to do that. We only do that at the beginning sparingly, where we're a safe for work labeled podcast. But if there's time where we're getting to very adult content or using adult language, we provide that flag in the beginning. So parents can just nope right out of there if they have to, if they got kids listening in the car or whatever. Hit replays are super brief. Well, per replay, they're brief. So they allow us to, again, be that shiny thing that we go through a few different audio samples. We can reference some things that are really current. And each host or each guest speaks for a max of 30 seconds on their recommendation of that week, their hit replay. And then we'll play an audio sample of that quote unquote hit replay. And that audio sample is just the hook. It's just the under 30 seconds of the chorus, or whatever it is that's catchy about that song. And podcasting is kind of like the Wild West right now in terms of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable on copyright content. We're admittedly still filling that out right now. But we try to keep the samples brief. And earlier when we talked about our values and principles, we stressed, do what works well for audio. Having a number of different audio music samples is really good for our podcasting format. You've got people's complete audio attention for that duration. So having music for that is really good dynamic. It gives us a chance to gush about something that we genuinely love, especially if we have to go into an episode where maybe we've got constructive things to say about a song that we're reviewing. We've done a couple experiments where people have asked us to promote something. The best time in the show to plug or promote or provide an advertisement for something is right after we're done with the hit replay. So that's still kind of in that overall intro section of an episode, but it's right after all the glitzy glammy sound stuff for the episode. All right, then moving on to the review portion of a Daebak or Not song. The message or theory section, we start with this because it's kind of like our thesis for what the song is trying to say. And that thesis should be reinforced or confirmed through all the other different lenses that we're applying to the song. So I don't know, if we're trying to say BTS's Spring Day is a song referencing the Seoul ferry incident and overcoming suicide and the pains of maturity, then what are all the ways that thesis is confirmed in the visuals, the music, the choreography, etc.? It's something that actually we thought about against the landscape of other podcasts at the time of this recording. Not a whole lot of other podcasts are doing that right now. And that could be something that could be our unique value proposition to our listeners. Catch the Kpop cast. They'll kind of take you through what this song is trying to say and why, help you appreciate the finer things that you may not have already noticed about your favorite song. That being said, we've learned not to force a meaning where there isn't any. So it could be fun to come up with a really cool, convoluted theory, but if we're not feeling it and we're not certain that that's the theory, then don't force it. You're just kind of insult your listeners and they're going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? All right, so after we talked about the message of theory, then we move on to the concept and the visuals. Like, what is this? Is this a virtual reality concept? Is this a beach concept? Is it like a sexy concept? What? And how's that seen through all the things that we're seeing on the screen? This is important because when you think about the phenomenon of K-pop, it's not about the music, guys. It's about the whole package. It's about that idol visuals and the fun, kitschy concepts that make K-pop so unique from any other genre of music. Now, as a podcast, again, going back to our values and philosophies, do what does well in audio. We're not sure if it makes sense to do a ton of time for an audio podcast format to talk about visuals, for choreography, because it's kind of hard to illustrate that for an audio listener. You can describe it, but it feels like an extra step to get to and relate to. Sometimes, like, if there's something especially remarkable, we'll try to cover it. Something really cool about their costuming. Really hilarious about how the same set has been used in a dozen other K-pop videos. What's interesting about very unique film technique that they used. Choreography is especially one of those areas that's very hard to do over audio. Like, their hands over here and then they move down here. Like, as an audio podcast listener, that's hard to relate to and describe. It often requires a visual reference. So here's actually an example of me. I did a reaction video to Chungha's play. And in that, like, I was able to, like, point at the screen. Here's where Chungha did this. She leaned forward here, and it did not provide her lead with this counterbalance. Like, and that's something that you can see on screen. It's better understood. So while dance is a core part of K-pop, it's hard to do on a podcasting format. And really, we only bring it up if it pertains to the unique things about the song, or if it warrants its own special shout out. All right, so the audio portion of our review. This is where I think we really need to lean into more as a podcast. It's a chance to get the listener to pay attention to a very particular thing that we're saying about the sound itself. If we want to reference something like, oh, there was a really interesting kick, you can then play a sample of that kick right after, so the listener knows exactly which ingredient or part you're referring to. You're able to establish a shared reference with a listener. Again, going back to our values, don't assume that your listener knows everything before the episode. So give them all the context they need within that self-contained package of an episode. And then after we've gone through all those really big, weighty core parts of reviewing a song, we'll provide a sort of like break, generally. Not every episode, but most episodes we do this. And that break is kind of, we use an audio clip. And that audio clip is a bridge of a song, or an instrumental of a song, or an acoustic remix. So you're not as distracted by what's being said in the song, but it's a moment that after you've kind of heard everything that you need to make a decision about whether a song can stay back or not, the listener has the time to contemplate. Just kind of like inhale, exhale really quickly. And then, and we also do it, by the way, if you look at this overall structure and format, the bridge of a song is usually like 3/4 of the way through. that break in our podcast structure is about that same 3/4 of the way section. And bridges are often used in music to kind of like build out tension. Like the hook that is coming around again. Before we get to that hook, we're going to give you something that's going to reinvent the verses and the lyrics that you haven't heard yet. It's that one special shout out section in the song. And that's what we have mirrored in the structure of our episode format. The break. It's a chance to build a little bit of tension right before we provide our final scores. Is this song Daebak or not? Okay, so Daebak or not, I put that in air quotes, started as something that we started originally as an FM radio show. And it was something that between DJ Mix show segments, we'd talk about a song like, oh, what do you think of this song? Was it Daebak or not? I thought it was Daebak. I didn't think it was not. So it's like something really brief, hot or not, right? And since that point, we've added all these other layers to it. But we still love the Daebak or not terminology. And actually my wife, who's running around here in the background, she was the one who came up with that awesome phrase. It's such a good phrase. Like when it has a unique cultural tie-in, and it's a very quick yes or no assessment of a song. And I think we're probably going to keep with that for a very long time. At earlier stages of our podcast, before we gave the thumbs up, thumbs down, Daebak or not score, we actually had a 1 to 5 score for different sections. So for the concept, for the visuals, we would ask each of the hosts how they rate it 1 to 5. Then we'd ask them to give their same numeric score for the audio, the song portion of the single. What we found is that in giving a numeric score for those things, people were often repeating themselves. They were kind of just rehashing what they said in earlier sections of the podcast and living up to our values of like, hey, let's not waste people's time or attention. Just get to the freaking point. So we just cut it because it was redundant. And what we like about the Daebak or not scoring is that we kind of like throw each other on the spot during that time. And it's like, just say it. Like, is it yes? Is it hot or not? Is it Daebak or not? And it's a way to provide a very visceral reaction. Like, it's Daebak, or it's not Daebak. Like, that's what I just gotta say. It's like, it's a very easy way to give something that's genuine. After we've provided our Daebak or not score, from time to time, like if we have time in the episode recording, I'll drop in a question or point of conversation to the other guests or the hosts for that episode, a question of broader universal application. If BTS's Spring Day is about civil fairy, does this open up precedent for other artists to cover such taboo topics in K-pop? Something like that. Something that's related, something that we've already established in the course of reviewing the song, to talk a bit more broadly and provocatively about K-pop at large. So after we provided that final score, then we'll go into the closeout section. And actually, this is where there's the most drop off when we look at our listener retention figures, and rightfully so. And that's really where we want them, honestly, to drop off. We actually save a lot of our listener feedback for the end by design, because if you know that, hey, the Kpop cast might include me in this episode, I want to hear myself. I want to indulge my own vanity. And you'll know that you'll hear yourself at the end. So that means you got to stick through to the end. That being said, we will make sure that we sprinkle in comments from other listener comments where they're relevant. Like if we're talking about something unique about the dance and we had a number of tweets or comments about the dance, we'll bring that up when we're talking about that section. After we provide listener feedback, we'll also we'll allow the guest to promote whatever it is that they want to promote, their one thing, do their own PR. We'll maybe talk about something very loosely, tangentially related, more like water cooler, office talk, like we're kind of shooting the shits. And we'll talk about why Soyeon is the best. And as we're using that outro bumper, we'll like try to, if possible, if we have time ahead of the airing date, and throw in a mashup of the song that was just discussed. Again, it's just like another way to present a new flair, a new way of thinking about the song that was for the focus of that entire episode. Or we'll add, this is like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, only for those who really get it. Sometimes we'll use the background music or remix or an instrumental of something that provides commentary on what was something that was just said. Like, for example, we just put out an episode on cancel culture. So we put in a song called Hate, or I Hate You by 2NE1. So it's like it's saying something about cancel culture. And then lastly, after we provided that mashup or song outro at the end, not every episode, but from time to time, if there's something funny off topic that was said during the course of the recording, that's where we'll put in the bloopers or the Easter egg. And I've heard other podcasts that will do that at the beginning, but like again, if people's retention starts at 100% at the beginning of the episode and it gets to like 9% at the end, like save it for the end. Like it's only the Easter eggs for the people who like really freaking care. Like you don't want to waste 90% of all your other listeners' time to like hear something that's just an inside joke amongst you, the staff or the producers. And that's our episode format. So you can see that from beginning to end for our Daebak or Not episodes. I think we're actually about to pivot to doing something different for Daebak or Not episodes at the time of this recording. All right, so some audio tips. These are things I would just recommend for any like newbie who's jumping into the world of podcasting. Add compressors. If when in doubt, just add a compressor. The great thing about podcast editing is that you can completely rearrange, completely change how something sounds. Maybe in the recording, someone rambled a bit, got to point A, then rambled a bit, then got to point B, then rambled a bit, then got to point C. Through editing, you're able to just cut out all the rambling and just go A, B, C. You're allowed to change the order that hosts speak to make sure that things feel more fluid. You can kill, most importantly, you can kill all the awkward pauses, the dead air in between tracks. That's the easiest thing to cut. No one's saying anything, just cut that out. Save the listener's time. When you record, it's best to record each individual track. And that allows you to move some voices up sooner, some voices behind. So that way you can get things to happen at more or less the same time. Sometimes like someone will laugh or chuckle, but I can steal that. Maybe they laugh or chuckled at something else in the podcast, but I made a joke. I can move it up to be right after I said a joke and I have someone laughing at me. So, supports my ego. You can occasionally use interruptions. Like if someone didn't end a point gracefully or smoothly, you can just have another person kind of jet in and interrupt them. And that's a way that you're not wasting time and people kind of get like, okay, this person was then jumping in with this idea. If a lot of people are speaking at once during a recording, it can sometimes separate when who says what so that the listener can hear one voice at a time. compressors are the best freaking thing. Like the compressors are like, you can use compressors for live recordings, but like you've got no excuse not to add a compressor. What a compressor does is you can establish a threshold. So every single time audio of a track goes above that threshold, that what the compressor will do, it will compress that sound. It'll move it down to whatever that threshold it is that you set. You can adjust how quickly you want that compressor to compress that sound down, how aggressively, how hard you want to hit it. And you can also, either through gain, a combination of gain and a makeup on a compressor, have the floorboard, the quietest sounds of a track, brought up to that threshold. So that way, like, you know, if you're listening to a podcast and someone's saying something kind of quiet, but you can't hear them, and so you want to turn up the volume, but then it's suddenly someone will talk at a normal volume, and then you're like, whoa, holy shit. Like, then you want to lower the volume so that you're not, like, your eardrums aren't blown out. What a set of compressors can do is, and gain, is help make sure that the volume remains consistent throughout your podcast, so that you don't have to have someone like have their hand on the volume knob going up and down through the podcast. And like, no one wants that. That's just insulting to your listener. You can also sidechain. And this is so critical when we're adding in background music for an episode. If you want someone to be saying something and then have music run underneath that, it can get very loud. Like, both for our ears and for the technology, you can only have so much sound come out at the same time. So what you want to do is you want to make room in the sound for what you want people's mind to be paying attention to. What a sidechain will do, you can set a threshold for every single time you set that compressor to sidechain to another source. If another source is someone's voice, you can set the background music to decrease in volume to that threshold every single time that person's voice comes on. That's ducking. It's audio ducking. So it's if I'm playing music right now and I start speaking, every single time I start speaking, the music will go down. It'll duck. And that carves out more room for the voice. And after that person is done speaking, or after that source is done speaking, the music goes back up to its original volume, or that whatever sound that you've got a sidechain on goes back up to its original volume. Again, you don't want the volume fluctuating up and down. And having a sidechain for the background music and someone's voice allows the overall sound to remain consistent throughout. And that's real nice on the ears. Really, and I guess I wrote in the bullet point here, it lets you be louder all the frickin' time. This is something that audio production people have complained about over the last 20 years or so, how music production has started to be loud all the time, that all mastering is at like 99 to 100% volume, and that it's less dynamic because things are always loud. That's a separate conversation. But really, what these compressors allow you to do, they give you greater granular control on how much you want those peaks and valleys to be, and that audio dynamicism in the podcast. Do you want things to be really loud all the time? Or do you deliberately want things to really duck down and be quiet? That's your creative decision. But compressors can help you get there. And you probably want compressors on every single track in your digital audio workstation. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't talk about this already. But DAW, your digital audio workstation, when it comes to podcasting, right now I'll say any one of them is fine. There's no wrong choice. We're using Ableton, and that's actually probably the wrong choice. Mainly because of how you're able to move and cut things around. We're looking at migrating to a different source. And everyone is different. podcasting, I think when people listen to podcasting, when they listen to radio, I think we've kind of been socially conditioned over time to expect a lower frequency for the host. And like to bring out those, like to boost the lower, and then decrease the middle. So it sounds like you've got a deeper, bolder voice, I guess. I don't know. And still captures some major semblances of your voice in the 2000 to 3000 hertz range. So it's just a way to provide more of a radio production quality to your voice. What we use, you can see in the screenshot, is a combination of different EQ tools. What I find is, again, because everyone is different, everyone's voice is different, and how you compensate for those sounds, be it just in the room that they're recording in, be it their voice, be it the microphone that they're using, the equalization settings that you use is always going to be different. Generally, what I try doing, if you can see this one screenshot, everything below the 200 hertz range, I bump up. So that's the lower tone. Then after that, I decrease that middle frequency. And again, in the 2000 to 3000 hertz range, that's where actually the human ears can hear most voice. So I actually bump that. And then lastly, after that, that's the tss, t, all the S's and T sounds. I try to decrease that. And I use that through a combination of different filters. So I'll use like a EQ 8 here. And then I'll also use, oh my gosh, you guys ready for the buzzword? I'll use a compressor. So it's another way to establish thresholds for the different frequency ranges so that every single time that a sound goes above a certain frequency range, it'll decrease it. I've set the headroom for the lower frequencies, everything below 200 hertz to go up super high. Decrease the decrease the middle frequencies, and then bump it back up again for that 2,000 to 3,000 hertz range. Again, that's going to vary a bit based off of the speaker, their natural voice, the room environment that they're recording, and the microphone that they're using. There's a ton of really expensive tools that you can also get and play with, such as RX-7, which you can use to, I don't know, for example, if you can hear right now, I'm probably not going to do any post-production on this recording, but like my son is playing in the background, and that's probably being picked up in this mic. But there are things that you can do to like remove that background sound. I'm also in like a really horrible place for recording right now. I mean, this is a big, wide, hard surface, open room. Tons of reverb and echo. So there are things you can do to like through machine learning algorithms to reduce the reverb in your room. There are things you can do to reduce the S's in the person's sound, to add a compressor to that. And the other really important thing that we do for each individual audio track is that we'll add, for sure, a compressor, a couple compressors actually. So it's a way to, like, if you have something hitting a sound at one threshold that you set, the compressor compresses the sound back down. And then we'll add yet another compressor right after that, which anything left over after that last compressor, you can push it down a little bit more gracefully. So it's a way to provide a more softer slope to the amount of compression that's happening at once. And then after that, we'll provide a limiter. So the limiter is like a very hard, do not pass, like no sound goes above this point. And like if you're too strong, like if you have too much pumping into that limiter, things will start to sound distorted. Like if you're trying to get sound to push beyond the volume of what the limiter is limiting, it's going to sound real bad. Still, we provide a limiter so that you're not redlining. You're not distorting across the entire track as a whole. You can limit each individual tracks, and we'll do that so that no one is going beyond, 100% in volume. And then we'll also, after we've done that for each individual track, we'll also provide it for the master track. So this is the master sound, which is taking in aggregate all the other sounds from all the other tracks. And we'll provide a couple of compressors and a limiter for that. Oh, yeah, so this kind of just goes through what I just mentioned earlier. Again, below 200 is probably where you want to boost. Around 2,000 to 3,000 hertz is probably what you want to bump up as well. Yeah. There are different microphones that are better optimized for podcasts just because they try to create the same dynamic naturally. What's the word I'm looking for? Through analog technology, they naturally produce the sound quality in the samples that they're capturing. And again, if you really want to go crazy, you can use RX-7 to do an absurd level of mastering on your sound overall. But a point on post-production. If someone did a bad recording, yes, you can do a lot to try to correct for it, but it starts to show, and you can really only go so far. And the amount of time that you're trying to spend in post-production to fix, I don't know, in this case, a screenshot I took of someone clicking their mouth, or let's say, I don't know, they're talking over here and you can't really hear them. You can try to fix that in post-production, or you can just ask them to freaking start over and send you a new recording, because that'll just save you time. So, I guess one of the bullets I put in here. At what point is it better just to re-record or ask yourselves to record better? Because as someone who's doing post-production or editing, you don't want to be stuck holding out the bridge for some dumb mistake that someone did earlier. Just get them to do it right. It's going to save everyone time. Okay, so here's some things that we're still learning and figuring out. As we learn through Twitter followers and 1-star reviews. Something that we did for a while, a great long while, was we had weekly Twitter chats through hashtag Kpop Chat. We had a person doing that, shout out to Supermatic, every week. And that was something really great, actually. Like, if we had bandwidth and time to do it, I would recommend still doing it. It was just a really good way to build community, check in with people, have an open dialogue. What people are listening to, and also collect intelligence and opinion on whatever it is that you're recording for that week. It also helped us build followers for our Twitter account. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably something we should probably get back to doing, honestly, if we can spare the cycles. We've also had, if you followed the history of the Kpop Podcast, we've had a number of volunteers come and go through this show. And I think we're at an impasse and a decision point where we're not going to entertain having so many volunteers right now. I think a challenge that we had, it was hard to keep and maintain accountability across a great number of people. Like, if 2 or 3 people aren't doing something, then it's hard to make the other people feel like they have to equally give in. And right now we've got a really strong trio who I think we feel, we're bought in the mission, the vision for the podcast. And I think we want to make sure that we're getting back to a point where we can be consistent before we want to just add in a bunch of other people to help us carry the load of the work on the podcast. To that point, we actually had in the past, maybe you've heard some of our PSAs and talks in different voices, asking for volunteers to help with the editing. You saw in that pie chart earlier, there was 75% of it was spent on all this post-production hell stuff. And we're looking to have volunteers to help us with that editing process. I think it was hard to make that rewarding for the volunteers. It's time intensive. We also did a thing where we had Ariana on the show, and she would video record herself doing kind of like a video recap of our hit replays for the week. A really short video snippet. I think what was hard is just realizing, what we realistically had bandwidth to do in video editing each week to go along with it. Hot issues, I think, was hard because, as I mentioned earlier, we give a hot take on something, but we weren't really arriving with a great deal of research for that hot issue. And just finding time for people to record like on the fly like that was difficult. We've done some experimenting very recently with live streaming, TBD if we continue that. Live streaming our raw recordings. And we're also using a Slack right now. So it's something that we've had to keep the coordination between the host going, between the internal staff of the podcast to coordinate what we're doing. But now we're opening it up to be a place where we can also have another behind the scenes space for our listeners and build community. So here's some hard things that we learned over our time. As I mentioned, we're learning not to go too wild and crazy with volunteers. A staff of fewer people is probably better who have a very strong sense of ownership over the end product. And with that smaller team, it's very, 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 very important that you make sure that you regularly check in with each other and that you share. These are the virtues that we're going to uphold and our values, our philosophy, and how we want to create a show, a podcast. And that we share the same vision. We talked earlier about the outlining of our podcast. I think a great number of people tuning in the podcast kind of feel like I'm around the dinner table with some friends, or I am joining in on a conversation with people. And unless you're looking to create an episode, which is like a essay or an audio drama or story where you want a hyper controlled format and flow of where you want to take the listener, it's probably best to keep a lot of that spontaneity, a lot of that uncontrolled exploration, to let the conversation be organic for the podcast and the recording itself. This is the most important thing that we struggle to maintain. It's continuity. So create a schedule and maintain it. Make sure that listeners know that they can count on that day, time of the week, that they're always going to get their fix, so that they can make sure that the podcast works around their schedule. If you're going to entertain using other platforms, such as YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, Amino, if you're going to use those platforms to promote or publish, make sure that you've got a commitment to it, that you're doing it on a recurring basis. Or if you're not going to keep doing it on a recurring basis, then communicate that you're going to close out. Like, hey guys, we're not going to invest in this platform as more. Here's where you can really catch us. So that's something that we need to do at the podcast. I think close out on some of these exploratory projects. And some of those projects weren't as successful because we weren't able to maintain that continuity. And here's a very critical lesson for everyone. Be your own harshest critic. Attack your inner narcissist. Wasn't necessary to say that thing on that podcast. What adds value to the episode? What advances the conversation? Are you keeping something in just because you said it? If so, then cut it. Kill it. Be ruthless. Don't waste their time. It detracts from your main point. Detracts from your essay. Detracts from your thesis. So here's some other things that we're looking at doing moving forward for the Kpop cast. I think the big one, number one right here, helping us get to that point of continuity, is kill all that post-production. We're looking at doing something much lighter in post-production, lower in production quality, frankly. to get something out frequently. We're also looking at, I referenced this earlier, potentially taking the video content of our live streams and using a different DAW to do both audio editing and video editing within the same interface. And Reaper is that DAW where you can take a video clip and pair it with your audio clip. And as you're doing dynamic, interesting things in audio production and editing, you can have that reflected with the video clip alongside with it. So Reaper is one tool that we're considering. Or you may do something completely different. Actually, I think, not to show my hand too much, but I think we might actually be doing something in number 3 right now, based off of the latest internal discussions. And number 4, my gosh, we all have got work, life, family commitments. You just saw my son earlier. Those family commitments have to continue. I'm running up to my son after this. And I could just be Carson, you're not allowed into this room. You're not allowed to join me here while I'm recording, but I'm just not going to do that. He's got to be here. He wants to be with his daddy often, so I'm not going to stop him. Maybe we'll find ways to give him small responsibility on the show so that I can be around while we record and edit things. Okay, here's another really interesting thing. We did think about doing a Patreon at one point. It'd be great to get compensation for all the volunteer work that we're putting into this. The reason why we're not is because we want to have complete unadulterated control over what we produce and say. When you start to sell that out, quite literally, sell it out to investors, to patrons, that compromises on your editorial independence, on what you're able to say. Also, alongside especially with the Patreon model, you're kind of expected to provide certain goodies, unique content for your patrons. And we just don't have that time. We can't reliably produce special content for patrons, given our work-life commitments. For us, this is just a hobby. And to be honest, I think, the 3 of us, we've got lucrative day jobs so that we don't need to make the money from a podcast. And anything that we really would make from a podcast, realistically speaking, isn't going to come close to our salaries. So with that, I think this is where I had it open for Q&A for when I did plan to present this presentation at the podcast convention that this was shared at. You can follow us at the Kpop Podcast. I'm at DJ Peterlow. You can follow the Kpop Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to stay on Soyeon. So with that, I hope that was helpful. Hi, Carson. All right. Time to tend to the kid.